So real quick, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a little bit of a talk here about, the fastest path to hybrid cloud. Okay, so what does that really mean? So I'll talk about that a little bit myself, and my colleague Gilles from VMware, he'll take you through some more of the details. So, I've been working with this product, this VMware AWS partnership since 2016, since July of 2016, and had the opportunity to see this thing from its infancy to where it was just a conversation in a conference room, to the launches into all of the regions that we are around the world and continuing to launch. And so as we took the next step and we began to really look at what is the compelling event for customers to want to use this. And really what we're finding is that when it comes to cloud directives, policy directives around moving to cloud, it's easier said than done. There's a lot of different reasons why organizations will or will not move to cloud, and the speed at which they do it. There's a lot of different factors there. I'll just leave it at that. However, what we're finding is that with the introduction of this partnership and this product, the hybrid story is becoming a lot easier to be had. It's becoming easier for customers to be able to adopt cloud and to continue to extend their on-premises environment into the cloud using hybrid. And so if we take a look at, this is a slide that we've used quite a bit, in fact, ever since the announcement, but it begs repeating. Why did AWS and VMware come together? Why did we even think to do this? For years, it was always the competition. No, you don't want to go to them, you don't want to go to these guys. Well, the fact of the matter remains, it was the case then, and it is still the case, that the standard, more or less the de facto standard in the data center, enterprise data center, is and has been VMware for years. And we don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, I don't see it changing. It's a tested, tried, true, tested, but very viable solution that continues to work very well, and it has very high customer adoption in the marketplace. From a cloud perspective, it made sense with AWS. Hyperscale cloud provider, we're pretty good at what we do. And customers were asking for the two companies to come together and work together. And since 2016, we've been able to do that and deliver, I think, a pretty good product on that front. And so, start out real quick with a quote from Andy Jassy. I mean, it's actually kind of funny because you say Andy's the cloud guy, and then you say, even he acknowledges and recognizes that much of the workloads on-prem are the migration to the migration path to the cloud is coming in the form of hybrid. But the version of hybrid that people have, the definition, seems to change quite a bit. And so when we take a look at these statistics here, the 64% is actually a little bit of a dated statistic, but early on it was approximately 64% of customers had mentioned that within 12 months they were going to look at VMware Cloud on AWS and spin up a hybrid solution. I've actually seen in more recent studies that has gone as high as 90%. Well, and I think that also depends on the type of customer you're speaking to. But what makes that possible and plausible is if you look at the fact that in the data centers, 70% of the workloads in there are all virtualized. So being able to make that migration, that hybrid migration, becomes a lot easier to do, a lot more, less difficult to execute. So why aren't customers doing it more frequently? And so when you look at the common challenges associated with hybrid, oftentimes what creates the gridlock or the heavy lift, if you would, to actually adopt hybrid is, there's oftentimes a lot of concern around operational consistency. Customers don't want to abandon existing tooling that they have put in place, made substantial investment, both from a software investment and from a people training and a resource training perspective. So they don't want to walk away from that or have to even double up on that. Hey, we've been running on-prem for years, and now we're going to start to adopt cloud. We're going to have to tool everybody up and get everybody trained. And then there's the concern about management and control. People feel like that are new to cloud, they have a tendency to feel like, well, I'm going to be giving up some of the elements of control of my environment. And that's, I think there's sessions later today when we talk about security of the cloud and things like that. As AWS customers, I think you probably can attest to the fact that not only do you have a lot of control, but there's a lot of demonstrated control and the ability to actually log that and have very tightly fine-grained access control of what's happening in your cloud. But getting customers to make that transition tends to be a bit of a blocker, if you would, on hybrid. And then the concern about enterprise class SLAs, we're finding more and more improving to our customers that is no longer a concern. And customers are moving very large, very sensitive workloads to our platform, both the VMware Cloud on AWS platform and native AWS platforms pretty consistently. So if we look at, since 2016, what have been the top use cases? This has been the case, well, it's been the case for a little while, but now it's actually becoming much more easy to execute because of the VMware Cloud partnership. So the cloud migration one is a very, very common pattern that we see here, or use case rather. Customers are looking to not make funding investments or substantial infrastructure investments into existing data centers. Perhaps it's a leased location and their lease is coming up for termination and they want to move out of a lease. And so we're finding that customers are making that move. That is a compelling event for them to want to adopt this service and this technology. Next one is data center extension. So for these customers, the case is pretty typical that they're not going to abandon their data centers. In fact, their data centers are going to persist. They may even grow. But the rate of expansion or growth may actually slow because they will take that expansion need, and offload that to the cloud. And so this is also a very common use case. We've had some pretty substantial customers do both of these, in fact. Disaster recovery. So no longer do you need to actually maintain a separate physical location with assets that you may or may not be able to test throughout the year. This actually, you can protect those workloads in a cloud-based environment. And I kind of have mixed feelings about this one, because in many cases you can say, well, I'm going to spin up VMware Cloud on AWS as my DR environment, but why not actually use it as well while you have it up and running? So to me, it's a hybrid of a hybrid. So you actually have the DR protections there for your on-premises workloads, but also use the environment as well. Then next generation applications. We have customers, I'll talk about one here in a bit, but they're still going to continue to operate their environment on-premise. They're adopting cloud. They're moving workloads into the cloud for DR scenarios, but also because the nature of the work that they're doing requires that they start to consume some of the native AWS services, like Lambda as an example. If they're looking for serverless type capabilities to integrate into their application, their next generation application, much of the infrastructure or much of the application as it's deployed today will continue to exist as it has for some time. But as the next generation of the applications begin to come online, more and more of the native AWS features or things that have been abstracted away from essentially a virtual machine are beginning to be consumed by customers into their application ecosystem. And so we're also seeing a fair amount of interest from customers that are looking to move their enterprise applications. So your SAPs of the world. Why? Because they don't have to refactor the environment to actually move it into AWS. It's an opportunity. I hate to say the words to do lift and shift, but there's some element of that. It's never as clean as that. We all know that. But there is the opportunity to be able to move the application stack or large pieces of it to the cloud without having to refactor the entire environment. When we get into Oracle workloads, Oracle has been something that over time with native AWS has kind of been, when especially customers who have rack as a requirement, that's kind of eluded AWS, the workloads. Now customers have a lot of opportunity with the VMware Cloud based Oracle workloads to be able to make different decisions on how they're going to move forward with that. And then on SQL Server, big environment shift there, especially with the pending end of life with SQL Server 2008. I think you'll find that there's some initiatives that are going on both in native AWS and in VMware Cloud on AWS around moving those enterprise apps to AWS or to the VMware Cloud on AWS. And so if we take a look at PHH Mortgage, so I talked about some of the use cases. here's an example of a customer that had to vacate a data center. They needed to do the consolidation. They needed to get out of an environment. They were under very tight time constraints. And so they engaged the VMware professional services community would actually be able to move all of their workloads, or 350 plus of workloads, in a very short amount of time. I think it was measured in days, I believe. And so here we have a situation where a customer was looking to actually abandon a second site completely, and they found themselves under a very tight time constraint, easy for me to say. And so they were able to maintain their operating environment as it was, and continue their operations while meeting their their corporate mandate to actually vacate the other data center. And so if we look at Playtika, their scenario is a little bit different in that they weren't abandoning where they're at. In fact, they outgrew it. They needed to actually increase capacity. They needed to scale capacity very quickly, but they didn't want to refactor the applications or the way they were doing things. So they started out in a dev test environment, offloading a lot of that requirement and capabilities from the on-prem environment, moving it into the cloud-based environment, and were very quickly able to scale out the workloads, 650 plus workloads. And they were able to do this and manage this without actually having any disruption in the process. And they were able to meet the increasing demands, the spikiness of the applications. And so the last one we'll talk about here real quick is Stagecoach. Stagecoach is a big customer, has done quite a bit on the platform, both on AWS and VMware Cloud and AWS. And so they found themselves under a cloud-first directive, and they needed some operational consistency in that as they're kind of, had a need to move to cloud, but they didn't have the time, or rather the desire even, to change the way that they were operating. They just needed to be able to have additional resources to operate a new environment to operate in. And so their adoption of AWS afforded them the ability to move some mission-critical applications to the cloud, meeting their cloud-first mandate and their requirement. And they were able to actually do this while maintaining the operational consistency that they were desiring, but some of the application capabilities they were building out and what they were releasing to their customers were actually starting to include and start to consume native AWS services. And so we started to see a nice blend between the two, between what they were currently running on premise and then now consuming native AWS components into the environment. So if we take a look at some of the benefits that we've talked about, live migration has been a big one for customers. So to be able to take workloads, have them still be running on-prem, and then actually have them flying or moving into a cloud-based environment without taking them down, taking them offline. Look back, pre-2016, it was it's possible to migrate workloads between on-prem and the cloud. It required you to take an outage or for you to actually double up your infrastructure, or even sometimes even greenfield new build-outs. That's not necessarily the case here anymore. The access to native AWS services has been something that customers have been speaking quite a bit about. It was things like, if you take an example, if you look at RDS as an example, so for customers who are interested in getting out of managing databases as a part of their business, they still want to manage their data, but they don't want to manage the database infrastructure. RDS is a service, it's a very common service that actually customers will start to gravitate towards even when they're running in VMware Cloud on AWS, because they have high bandwidth, low latency connections to a database service that's being brought to them and managed as a service as part of their AWS account. Licensing costs, that's always a consideration. Now customers have a lot of flexibility about how they deploy license-sensitive or compute-sensitive licensing agreements, I guess it'd be a nice way to talk about that. And so, and as always with VMware, you have support for a broad set of operating environments that may or may not have been available on AWS. And so we're seeing quite a bit of adoption. We're seeing it across the industries, multiple industries. We're seeing it in banking industries. We're seeing it in government. In fact, government is growing quite a bit. As the platform goes through certifications, compliance certifications, and reviews, the amount of demand that's building up around the government customers interested in using and adopting this platform is growing substantially. And so from our partner ecosystem and our partners that are actually working with those customers as well, oftentimes many of their solutions, they're making the transition as well to be able to run within VMware Cloud on AWS without necessarily needing to have some of the native hooks that they may have had in the past into the hypervisor. And so there's been quite a, this partnership is not only transforming both AWS and VMware in the way we do business with our customers, but it's quite a transformative force, if you would, in our partner ecosystem as well. And so I'm going to pause here, give it to my colleague, let him take us through a little service overview and a recap of what we have, and then I'll wrap it up with some of the things that we're talking about. We have some promotions that are actually out and running now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we're going to go a little bit deeper in terms of architecture. And if there is one slide you need to remember, it's that one. Here, I really want to express the communication that we have between your data center, the customer data center over here, the VMware Cloud on AWS, which is a full stack VMware, including vSphere for compute, vSAN for storage, and NSX for the networking, with vCenter on top of it. So the first thing that customers are going to do is link the vCenter together, so we will have a global view of the on-prem infrastructure and also the cloud infrastructure. So we have this link that we can express together with the vCenter. We have also a way to migrate VMs, because this is really what we want to do, is to be able to have VMs from your on-prem data center moving to the cloud within the VMware infrastructure. And we can do that even live if you need to do it. But what is also important is that link, and that link is a networking construct between the VMware Cloud environment and the native services from AWS. So this will allow us to connect to services like EC2, S3, relational database from a VMware environment. So you run your VMs, you migrate your VMs from your on-prem to the cloud. You don't touch them, you don't modify them. You can migrate them live if you need to. We can do layer 2 extension. And once they are in the VMware Cloud environment, they can access native services. One of the main use cases we have here is S3, for example, where many customers are going to take that environment and back it up to S3 with third-party vendors. So it's a very compelling environment. We are in the same region from AWS. We are moving a lot within the infrastructure itself, and we run on bare metal infrastructure. So if we look inside the VMware Cloud, we have an EC2 environment, but it is an EC2 bare metal. It's not an AMI, or it's not anything virtualized with hypervisor. We run ESXi host with bare metal servers. So today we have a certain EC2 instance. We run on i3, and the capability for running a cluster is a minimum of 3 nodes. And once you deploy this minimum of 3 nodes, then you will be able to have a complete stack of VMware in about 2 hours. Okay? So You deploy, you are on AWS, you have a dedicated environment for your workloads, and you will be able to connect to an AWS VPC to actually have access to native services. So you have here the latest software from VMware, ESXi, NSX, vSAN. We have dynamic capabilities, so we are able to move workloads inside the cluster. We are maintaining this cluster. This is a service from VMware. We are operating it as well. We are doing software upgrades on that cluster. Everything happens in the background. If we need hardware maintenance, then we will bring a new host. We will migrate VMs to that new host and eventually evacuate another host. So this is a VMware service. This is really important to remember, fully configured by VMware, running the latest software. For example, in vSphere, we run 6.8, which is not even available on-prem. The provisioning is done with API to AWS. This is really important. It's very fast. If you want to add a node to the cluster, it takes 10 minutes. It takes 2 hours to provide a complete cluster, but if you want to add capacity, and that's the beauty of the cloud, it takes about 10 minutes to add a node. Operational, this is supported by VMware directly. So you have on the portal, you have a support button. You can actually click on it, have a chat directly with VMware support 24 hours. And this is very much an AWS infrastructure. So we run in AWS regions. We opened 2 weeks ago Paris. So in Europe, we are pretty well suited. We have Dublin available. We have London, we have Frankfurt, and now, since 2 weeks, we have Paris. The next one will be Stockholm, probably September timeframe. But in the meantime, we are running within many AWS regions in the world, Asia Pacific. We just opened Singapore also, and Mumbai 2 weeks ago. In the US, US West, US East, also government cloud. The maintenance is ongoing with VMware management. So this is really something important, that you don't need to care about what software you run, or what's going on, or if we need an upgrade or a maintenance. Sometimes AWS want to have a host maintenance. We can swap host completely transparently, and this is really something very nice. So basically, if we look at the new capabilities we introduced in February, a couple of months ago, we have announced a new hardware, which is the R5 Metal. We run today on i3 Metal. We announced the R5. It should be available within a week or two. And the R5 is something interesting because from a storage point of view, we're going to use elastic block storage from AWS. So this is something nice. We also introduce a feature that will reduce your cost in terms of licensing. Many software like Oracle and SQL are actually licensed on core, number of core. Since we are using high-level servers from AWS, 36 core, 48 core per node, we have now a way to reduce this number of cores. So if you want, for example, an Oracle cluster, and a cluster is minimum 3 nodes, you can say, okay, I want to reduce these 36 nodes, 36 cores to 8 or 16. And you will be able to do that on the BIOS level before we do the deployment. From a security point of view, a lot of the vCenter permission model, this is also something very specific to VMware. And for protection, of course, disaster recovery is a very important use case. So we put all the software elements from VMware around disaster recovery, tools that you are familiar with, like SRM, Site Recovery Manager, or vSphere Replication. So we use the same tools that you are familiar on-prem, we use the same tools in the cloud. So these are the regions available. We are trying to follow the development from AWS. The goal is to have all regions by the end of the year. Maybe, apart from China, maybe, I don't know. But basically, we are going full speed ahead together with AWS on deployment. So, high capacity storage with elastic block storage and R5 metal. So this is really a new type of instances that we are going to deploy. So this is really using elastic block storage, and that gives us the capability of scaling the storage very much. With i3, we have about 10 terabyte per node. With R5, we can go up to 35 terabyte on elastic block storage. So this is a very nice way to scale in terms of storage. We are working constantly with AWS on new instances. We have requirements from our customers with many type of features. For example, if you run VDI or Horizon, you need the graphic, the GPU. So we're working on that as well. If you go for SAP HANA, you may need a lot of memory. So we are working on that as well. So the relationship with Amazon is really nice. It's fantastic, specifically with the networking people. And we did a lot of work together, but also on the instances, we are going to do a lot of work. So this is the CPU core count. You can reduce to 8 core or 16 core per node if you have concern about software licenses that you are going to pay. So basically, we have now on vSAN, we have native support for Microsoft SQL Server. So this is really something that we've been working together with the customer. Remember that the customer demand also drives the development, okay? This is really important. This is a feedback that it is important for us that we are, pushing back to the US and have, the support for what the customer really wants. So here, native support for shared disk. This is really something on the latest vSAN software that we have put in the cloud without iSCSI setup. So this is really something that comes in the latest revision. And most important is HCX. HCX is a hybrid cloud extension. This is a module that is embedded in the software for VMware Cloud. This is not an add-on you have to pay. And this module is being developed to create an infrastructure abstraction between your on-prem environment and the cloud. And so helping you migrate your VMs from on-prem to the cloud. And the nice thing with the HCX is like it's been really built for data center extension or data center evacuation, even if your on-prem vSphere is not the latest, okay? And we have many customers still running on old software like 5.5 or 6.0. HCX here is going to help you to build this hybrid infrastructure and migrate your VM to the cloud itself. So we have a nice feature here, because when we do migration, the pain point is the storage. Usually it takes a long time to migrate the storage. If you want to migrate 500 VMs, it will take a long time. So we have developed a feature called Cloud Motion. And the Cloud Motion is actually using vSphere replication to give you the ability of migrating your software in the background. So you have your VMs. We start moving the storage to the cloud. That takes some time. Can take a week or maybe 2. It doesn't matter. Your VMs continue to run in on-prem. We're migrating the storage to the cloud. When this is done, you can schedule the cutover. When you schedule the cutover, we do a vMotion from on-prem to the cloud. We can do that live, and we do the last sync for this migration. So we have customers that have migrated hundreds of VMs over a weekend. Okay, they prepare, they schedule, we migrate the storage with vSphere replication, and we do the cutover. But most important, if you want to go back, it's possible. Okay, so some people also say, yeah, okay, I move to the cloud, or I replicate my machines to the cloud. I have like 1 month's need, 2 months' need, and then I want to go back. It's also possible. So for protecting your environment, so we have this site recovery software that is very similar to the one we have in on-prem. It's the same VMware Site Recovery Manager using the same technology of vSphere replication that will help us to actually protect on-prem site to the cloud. This is site 1. This is site 2. We can protect to the cloud. This is also cloud-to-cloud protection. This is something interesting that many customers have asked us also. Yeah, I'm running VMware Cloud in Frankfurt, but I want a protection in Paris, okay? So this is also cloud-to-cloud protection in terms of disaster recovery, and this is possible to do. So I will let Paul finish with this presentation, couple of slides specific to the relationship between AWS and VMware, and we will have open questions at the end.
Thank you, sir. So I spoke a little bit earlier about RDS being a native service that's common for customers to begin to consume once they land in VMware Cloud on AWS. Recently, it was announced that there's the Amazon RDS for VMware. What's the difference? Well, in some cases, you could actually have, with this version of RDS, you have the option of being able to run RDS either in VMware Cloud on AWS, or if you want to run it at your location on premise, running the AWS managed RDS capability, but running inside of your VMware environment on-prem. So what does that really mean? Well, it means that when it comes to managing and operating the database environment, we have the different flavors of the VMware of RDS that are available. All of that heavy lifting is done by AWS. The management of that environment running on the platform is done by AWS. And so the RDS capabilities that are in the cloud, so the console, all of the integration into those capabilities, a deployment of RDS for VMware is actually also integrated into those cloud operating capabilities. And so more to come on this environment as well. So Outposts. Outpost was a recent announcement at reInvent. It's actually generated quite a bit of buzz. In fact, a lot of interest. We have a lot of customers that are very interested in this environment. So what is it? What is it really? And so what Outpost is an ability to bring AWS native infrastructure, the same infrastructure, same server, EC2 compute that we're running inside of our regions, bringing it on site into a customer's data center. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, the use case, very common use cases are customers who really cannot afford the time penalty, the latency, from the latency of transferring data that they are collecting or generating on premise to the cloud, processing and returning it. So if you have latency sensitive applications, Outpost is a very logical next step. Now, this actually, because it's AWS infrastructure, it's the bare metal infrastructure that we're running the EC2 instances running in the cloud. It also extends the VPC boundary, the VPC operating environment that is operated in the cloud within the region, extends out to your customer location and is operating there. So it's the same control plane, same consistent control plane for application development. If your application today hits the AWS endpoints or hits VMware endpoints, that still continues to be the case, where the actual workload and where the actual change may happen or occur is either in the region or on-prem. So there's multiple variants of Outpost that have been announced. So there's the AWS native version, which is EC2, native EC2 running on AWS bare metal. You actually have either a single node or multiple racks per location. It's customer's choice, and you can pick from different instance families. So it's not one size fits all. It's if you need a mix of different flavors of instance families, you can have that choice designed into it. Then there's also a VMware variant of that, and so the VMware variant has what we have listed here on screen is the Cloud Foundation for EC2 capability, which essentially is EC2, native EC2 operating on the Outpost, but it has NSX networking integrated and working in that environment as well. But then there's also a slight twist on that, which just so happens to be the premise of this talk, is the VMware Cloud on AWS. And so the VMware Cloud on AWS that we talked about here that's been delivered into the region, there's the option to actually have that managed cloud offering delivered to you on-prem, running on an Outpost. So really excited about how this is starting to grow a lot of momentum in the marketplace. In fact, that's actually one of my other jobs, is to manage the Outpost relationships for our public sector customers. So if there's any questions on the VMware piece or on Outpost, feel free to grab me during the summit today. Looking at promotions, so it's always nice to see promotions out there. So there's a couple of them that are still outstanding and that are live. First is a 90-day direct connect service for new customers that are onboarding VMware Cloud and AWS. While it's possible to actually connect with a VPN connection, your best experience is clearly going to be over a direct connect. And so we're encouraging customers to onboard not only to the service, but to also try the direct connect service as part of that as well. And we're offering a promotion around that. So there's also an add-on. So for VMware Site Recovery, you can protect up to 200 VMs for a period of time. I think it's 90 days, yep. So that is still currently a live promotion, and we're seeing a lot of customers are pretty excited about these so far. And then the last one is a single node cluster. So renewing a single node cluster, or actually getting a 3-node cluster for the price of a 2-node cluster. So customers who want to just kick the tires, they're interested in just let me see what the service is all about. I want to run some workloads on it. I want to perhaps maybe connect it up to a dev network and do some of the testing that they claim that can be done on this. And so the single node cluster is pretty popular for that. That's a non-persistent environment though, so that environment eventually self-destructs and goes away unless you choose to convert it over to a 3-node cluster. So as an option, you have that sitting out there. And so constantly updating information. One of the URLs on here, in fact, which one is it? We have a so on one of the locations that you want to manage and watch is on the VMware website. There is the roadmap. VMware does an excellent job of managing the roadmap and maintaining a roadmap of features that are being announced for this service that are both it starts literally with what's been launched all the way down into what's actually on the development roadmap. And so if you want to get a good indication of where the product is going and how quickly this thing's continuing to evolve, I encourage you to keep an eye on the roadmap portion of the VMware website to do an excellent job of maintaining that. And if you have any questions, we'll make ourselves available here off stage and happy to discuss either here or out within the rest of the summit for the remainder of the day. And I appreciate everybody's time here. Thank you very much.
We have some time for questions if you want.
We have a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions. Yes? So the question is, what is the biggest advantage of using VMware Cloud? I think it's a great question. By the way, do you know the difference between a good question and a great question? The great question, I know the answer. So basically, I would resume that into just a couple of words. Migrating VMs to the cloud is not a simple task. If you try to take an application that you run on-prem and you want to migrate it natively to any cloud, it's a big task. And for me, the biggest advantage of VMware Cloud on AWS is the fact that you don't touch your application. You can take your VMs as is, you can take your application as is, and migrate it to an AWS infrastructure that runs a VMware stack, and that's the big advantage, without touching your application. Though this is an easy migration, this is an immediate migration that can be done over a weekend, and for me, this is the biggest advantage. Of course, we have the AWS relationship, and we saw that this is not a one-way relationship like VMware to AWS. Now we see AWS also coming to VMware, RDS is coming to VMware, Outpost is an on-prem infrastructure. So this relationship is here to stay, and we're developing it also. And I love the networking relationship.
Yeah.
It's really something very, very nice. So this is for me the biggest advantage.
Well, as a shameless plug for AWS, as the AWS guy on the tape, I agree with everything you said, by the way, but I think we can't downplay the benefit of having low latency, high bandwidth connectivity to native AWS services. It just, in the past, customers who were running on-prem and wanted to have either a portion of their application stack or even sometimes all of it running using things like serverless capabilities or a managed service that runs in the cloud, whether it's AWS or otherwise, it was kind of a little bit prohibitive to actually adopt that type of architectural pattern. And so now that you have a workload that would be running and exists inside of the same region as the services that you were looking to extend or begin to consume, it's a game changer, and it starts to change the way people think about their application stacks, the way that they're developing, the way they're deploying, and frankly, their strategies overall, their whole digital strategy. And so I see it as a transformative technology in the data center and within the IT organizations. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
It's great that you have this relationship with AWS. AWS is great, but how big are the chances that there will start a relationship with other cloud providers?
Okay, so we have a super relationship with AWS. What about other cloud providers? Today, the relationship with AWS is unique, okay? And this is a deep relationship. Now, we know that other cloud providers are looking at similar type of solutions. Microsoft Azure, IBM Cloud, OVH, all these cloud providers today, they can deliver VMware Service. But this is not a relationship that we have together with them. We don't do any work with Microsoft. We don't do any work with IBM, although they run the VMware stack. But that's the service they give. It's not a VMware service. So this is really something important. With AWS, it's a VMware service that we have developed together with AWS. And that's been a lot of development. And I mean even deep dive development. We come to AWS and ask them to change the way they advertise BGP on a direct connect. Yeah, okay, we talk. We sit around, we say we need this and this and this, and this is why we need it, and we do the work together. This is an engineering solution together. We don't do that with Azure. We don't do that with IBM or OVH. Although these cloud provider will give you a VMware service that they manage, not us. That's the big difference.
Yeah, while I can't speak to any other cloud provider relationships, I do want to reinforce the fact that this is a jointly engineered solution, has been since day one. It's you know, I think sometimes it can be perceived from the outside looking in as VMware is just buying AWS services and delivering a capability. That couldn't be farther from the truth. It's actually very much a collaborative joint engineering effort. The networking example that was just given is a prime example. But if you look at EC2, if you look at the advancements on the EC2 platform with our Metal platform, in fact, VMware was the first solution delivered on the i3 Metal capability. That was delivered, 9 months before we actually even released it to the public. So very heavily integrated from our engineering teams. So it's a great relationship. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other questions?
So I